You know that feeling when you're just trying to live your life peacefully, and then some self-appointed parking lot dictator decides to make it their personal mission to ruin your day? Well, buckle up, because I'm about to tell you about the most entitled Karen I've ever encountered. And trust me, I've met my fair share. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning when I pulled into the parking lot of my local grocery store. Now, this isn't some fancy mall or premium shopping center. We're talking about a regular suburban grocery store with a parking lot that's seen better days. The kind of place where half the lines are faded and people generally follow the unspoken rule of park wherever there's space and don't be a jerk about it. I spotted what looked like a decent space near the front. Not the closest spot, mind you, but close enough that I wouldn't have to trek across the entire lot with my groceries later. As I approached, I noticed there was plenty of room on both sides. Perfect. I pulled in, centered my car nicely between the faded white lines, and turned off the engine. That's when I saw her. Standing about 20 feet away was a woman who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a Karen Starter Pack catalog. You know the type. Perfectly styled blonde bob that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Designer athleisure where that screamed, "I demand to speak to managers for sport." And that particular facial expression that suggested she was perpetually offended by the mere existence of other people. She was standing next to a massive white SUV, the kind that's big enough to transport a small army, but is obviously used primarily for solo trips to Target. And she was staring at me. Not just looking, staring. Like I'd just committed some heinous crime against humanity by having the audacity to park my car in a public parking space. I grabbed my wallet and keys, locked my car, and started walking toward the store entrance. That's when Karen made her move. "Excuse me," she called out in that particular tone that immediately puts you on high alert. You know the one. It starts sweet, but has enough underlying venom to kill a small animal. I turned around, genuinely curious about what could possibly be wrong. Maybe I dropped something? Perhaps there was an issue with my car I hadn't noticed? "Yes," I replied, maintaining what I hoped was a pleasant expression. She marched over with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life, clipboard in hand. Because of course she had a clipboard. I swear, Karen's clipboard must have been enchanted, because she wielded it like it gave her dominion over all of creation. "You can't park there," she announced, gesturing dramatically toward my perfectly legal parking job. I looked back at my car, then at the parking space, then at her. "I'm sorry, what?" "That space is reserved," she said, tapping her pen against her clipboard with the rhythm of a woodpecker having a nervous breakdown. Now, I've seen reserved parking spaces before. They usually have, signs. Big obvious signs that say things like reserved, or employee only, or expectant mothers. I looked around the area where my car was parked. No signs. No special paint. No indication whatsoever that this space was anything other than a regular public parking spot. "Reserved for who?" I asked, genuinely confused. Karen puffed up like an indignant peacock. "For residents of the Willowbrook community," she declared, as if she'd just revealed some sacred truth that should have been obvious to anyone with half a brain. Here's where things get interesting. The Willowbrook community she was referring to is a housing development about half a mile away from this grocery store. Nice houses, sure, but definitely not close enough to have any legitimate claim to parking spaces at a completely separate business. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is a public parking lot for a grocery store. I don't think residential communities get to reserve spaces here." The look she gave me could have curdled milk. "I am the president of the Willowbrook Community Association," she announced, pulling out what appeared to be some kind of laminated badge from her purse. "And we have an arrangement with this establishment." An arrangement? Right. Because that's totally how grocery store parking works. I'll give Karen credit for one thing. She was committed to her delusion. Most people, when called out on obvious nonsense, will at least have the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Not our Karen. She doubled down like she was betting her entire life savings on a rigged poker game. "Look," I said, trying to channel my inner diplomat. "I'm just here to buy groceries." The space wasn't marked as reserved, and I parked legally within the lines. "I'll be out of here in 30 minutes, tops." Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. 30 minutes? 30 minutes. She said it like I'd just announced my intention to homestead in the parking lot permanently. This is completely unacceptable. These spaces are for community residents only during peak hours. Peak hours. At 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when the store was maybe 1/3 full and there were literally dozens of empty parking spaces scattered throughout the lot. What peak hours? I asked, gesturing toward the mostly empty parking lot. And where exactly are these rules posted? She waved her clipboard in the air like she was conducting an orchestra of outrage. The rules are clearly established in our community agreement with the store management. If you were a resident, she practically spat the word, you would know this. I looked around again, hoping to spot a store employee or manager who could clear this up. The parking lot remained frustratingly devoid of anyone in a position of actual authority. Just me, Karen, and her magical clipboard of made-up regulations. Tell you what, I said, maintaining what I hoped was a reasonable tone. Why don't we go inside and ask the store manager about this arrangement? I'm sure they can clarify the parking situation for both of us. Karen's face went through a fascinating series of color changes, pink to red to something approaching purple. I don't need to ask anyone anything. I know what the rules are because I helped make them. And there it was, the admission that she'd appointed herself as the unofficial parking lot enforcement officer. In her mind, she wasn't just some random customer having a bad day. She was the duly appointed guardian of suburban parking justice. Ma'am, with all due respect, you can't just make up parking rules for a business you don't own, I said, my patience starting to wear thin around the edges. That's when Karen played her trump card. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my car, license plate, make, model, the works. Fine, she declared with the air of someone who'd just solved world hunger. I'm documenting this violation and reporting it to the proper authorities. The proper authorities. For parking in a legal parking space. At a grocery store. On a Tuesday morning. I watched her circle my car like a detective at a crime scene, snapping photos from every conceivable angle. Part of me was genuinely impressed by her dedication to this bizarre performance art piece she'd created. The other part of me was starting to get seriously annoyed. You know what? I said, my voice taking on just a hint of an edge. Go ahead and call whoever you want. But I'm going to do my shopping now. I turned to walk away, figuring that would be the end of it. Karen would rant and rave for a few more minutes, realize no one was paying attention to her theater production, and eventually find some other windmill to tilt at. I should have known better. Don't you dare walk away from me, she shrieked, her voice carrying across the parking lot like a fire alarm. I'm not finished with you. Several other shoppers had started to notice the commotion. A couple of them slowed down to watch the show, probably wondering if they should intervene or just enjoy the free entertainment. I stopped and turned back around. Actually, you are finished with me. I'm going shopping now. Have a great day. That's when Karen made the decision that would transform this from a minor parking lot disagreement into a full-scale suburban warfare scenario. She walked over to her massive SUV, got behind the wheel, and proceeded to position her vehicle directly behind my car. Not just close. I'm talking inches away from my rear bumper. Close enough that a piece of paper wouldn't fit between our vehicles. She had blocked me in. Standing there watching Karen execute her automotive hostage situation, I had to admire the sheer audacity of it all. In her mind, she'd just played the ultimate power move, the checkmate of suburban parking disputes. The problem with Karen's strategy was that it revealed something crucial about her character. She was the type of person who would escalate a minor disagreement into a major confrontation rather than admit she might be wrong. I walked back toward the cars, pulling out my phone. Interesting approach, I called out to her. So now you're going to illegally block my car because you're upset about my completely legal parking? Karen rolled down her window with the smuggest expression I've ever seen on a human face. I'm not blocking you, she announced with the confidence of someone who'd clearly never been properly challenged in her life. I'm simply parking my vehicle in the available space behind you. Available space. Right. The available space that happened to be about 3 inches from my bumper in what was clearly the driving lane of the parking lot. Ma'am, you're blocking traffic and creating a safety hazard, I said, gesturing toward the lane she was now occupying. Other cars need to get through here. She waved dismissively. There's plenty of room for cars to go around. I looked at the situation objectively. Her massive SUV was positioned in such a way that it would force any other vehicle to swing wide into the opposite lane to get around us. During busy periods, this would create a legitimate traffic jam. Even now, with the lot relatively empty, she was clearly violating basic parking lot etiquette and probably several traffic laws. Look, I said, trying one more time to appeal to whatever rational brain cells might still be functioning in her head. This is getting ridiculous. You can't just block people's cars because you're having a bad day. Karen's response was to turn off her engine and cross her arms. The universal body language for, "I'm not going anywhere." That's when I realized I was dealing with someone who had progressed beyond normal Karen behavior into what I like to call advanced Karen syndrome, a condition characterized by the complete inability to back down from any position, no matter how absurd, combined with an unshakable belief that the rules of civilized society don't apply to them. Time for a new strategy. I walked around to the front of my car and started taking pictures. Her license plate, her vehicle blocking mine, the clear violation of parking lot traffic flow. If Karen wanted to play the documentation game, I was happy to participate. "What are you doing?" she demanded, rolling her window down further. "Oh, just documenting the situation," I replied sweetly. "You know, for the proper authorities." Her face went through another fascinating color transformation. "You can't take pictures of my car." "Actually, I can. We're in a public parking lot, and your vehicle is creating a traffic hazard. I'm pretty sure the police will be very interested in these photos." The mention of police made Karen's eye twitch slightly. Good. Maybe she was starting to realize that her brilliant hostage strategy might have some unintended consequences. "Fine," she huffed. "Call the police. They'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you. You're parked illegally." I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "You know what? Great idea. Let's get this sorted out right now." As I waited for the non-emergency line to connect, I noticed Karen's confidence starting to waver just a little bit. She kept glancing around the parking lot, probably calculating whether she could make a quick exit if things went south. 911, what's your emergency? "Hi. This isn't exactly an emergency, but I'm at the Meadowbrook Shopping Center and someone has blocked my car in the parking lot. They're claiming I'm parked illegally, but there are no posted signs, and now they're creating a traffic hazard." The dispatcher was professional and helpful. They took down the location and said they'd send an officer to sort out the situation. Estimated time, 15 to 20 minutes. I hung up and smiled at Karen. Officer should be here soon. I'm sure they'll be able to clear up any confusion about parking regulations. For the first time since this whole circus began, Karen looked genuinely concerned. She was probably starting to realize that her arrangement with the store management might not hold up under official scrutiny. "You didn't need to call the police," she said, her voice losing some of its earlier authority. "This could have been resolved between us." "Really?" I replied. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who escalated this by blocking my car. I tried to resolve it reasonably, remember?" She sat in her SUV for a few more minutes, clearly wrestling with whether to cut her losses and leave. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, pride versus practicality, stubbornness versus self-preservation. Pride won. She got out of her SUV and marched toward the store entrance. "I'm going to speak to the manager and get this straightened out right now." Finally, maybe we get some actual answers about these mysterious parking arrangements. I followed Karen into the store, genuinely curious to see how this conversation with the manager would play out. Part of me was starting to wonder if maybe, somehow, there really was some kind of arrangement I didn't know about. It seemed incredibly unlikely, but Karen's confidence was so unwavering that it made me question my own judgment for just a moment. The customer service desk was near the front entrance, staffed by a tired-looking teenager who probably wasn't equipped to handle whatever was about to unfold. Karen marched up to the counter like she was approaching the gates of Mordor. "I need to speak to your manager immediately," she announced in a voice that could have shattered glass. "There's a serious parking violation that needs to be addressed." The kid behind the counter, his name tag said Tyler, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Let me get my supervisor, he mumbled, reaching for the phone. While we waited, I positioned myself close enough to hear the conversation, but far enough away to avoid being immediately associated with Karen's impending meltdown. Other customers were starting to stare, probably wondering if they were about to witness some kind of retail apocalypse. A few minutes later, a middle-aged woman in a store polo shirt approached the counter. Her name tag identified her as Linda, store manager. She had the weary expression of someone who dealt with more than her fair share of difficult customers. "How can I help you today?" Linda asked with practiced professionalism. Karen launched into her story with the enthusiasm of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "This person," she said, gesturing dramatically in my direction, "has parked illegally in one of the spaces reserved for Willowbrook community residents. I've explained the situation to them, but they refuse to move their vehicle." Linda looked confused. "I'm sorry, reserved spaces?" "Yes," Karen exclaimed, pulling out her clipboard and laminated badge. "The spaces in the front section of your parking lot. We have an arrangement, remember? I'm Janet Morrison, president of the Willowbrook Community Association." The look on Linda's face was priceless. It was the exact expression you'd see on someone who'd just been told that aliens had landed and were demanding to speak to the manager about the quality of Earth's Wi-Fi. "Ma'am, I'm not aware of any arrangement with your community association. We don't have reserved parking spaces for specific neighborhoods." Karen's face went through its familiar color-changing routine. But I spoke to someone here about this just last month. They assured me that the front spaces would be prioritized for community residents during peak shopping hours. "You may have spoken to someone," Linda said diplomatically, "but we don't have any official policy like that. Our parking lot is first come, first served for all customers." I watched Karen's entire worldview crumble in real time. You could literally see the moment when she realized that her elaborate fantasy about being the appointed guardian of grocery store parking was just that, a fantasy. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "I have documentation." She started rifling through her clipboard, pulling out various papers and waving them around like evidence in a court case. Linda glanced at the documents with the patience of a saint. "Ma'am, these appear to be internal communications from your community association. We're not party to any of these agreements." The clipboard papers weren't official agreements with the store. They were Karen's own notes and possibly some internal HOA memos about trying to establish parking arrangements. She'd essentially appointed herself as the negotiator for a deal that never actually happened. "But I'm the president," Karen insisted, as if her title in a residential community gave her authority over random retail establishments. "I understand that," Linda replied calmly. "But being president of your community association doesn't give you the authority to designate parking spaces at our store." At this point, I decided to speak up. "Excuse me, Linda? I'm the person she's talking about. My car is legally parked in a regular parking space, but she's blocked it in with her SUV. I've already called the police because she's creating a traffic hazard." Linda's eyebrows shot up. "Someone blocked your car?" "She did," I said, pointing at Karen. She positioned her vehicle directly behind mine, claiming she was enforcing parking rules that apparently don't exist. Linda looked at Karen with a new expression, one that suggested she was rapidly reassessing the situation. "Ma'am, you can't block other customers' vehicles in our parking lot. That's actually illegal." Karen opened and closed her mouth several times, like a fish that had suddenly realized it was no longer in water. Her entire power structure was collapsing around her, and she was clearly struggling to process this new reality. I was just trying to maintain order," she stammered. "These spaces should be for residents." "Ma'am," Linda said firmly, "I need you to move your vehicle immediately. You're creating a safety hazard and potentially preventing other customers from shopping." That's when we heard the sound of a car door slamming outside, followed by the distinctive crackle of a police radio. The officer who walked through the automatic doors looked exactly like what you'd want in a cop dealing with parking lot disputes. Professional, no nonsense, and probably experienced enough to spot nonsense from a mile away. His name tag read, Officer Martinez, and he had the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible variation of human stupidity. Someone called about a parking dispute, he asked, looking between Karen, Linda, and me. Karen immediately perked up, apparently thinking that official law enforcement would vindicate her position. Yes, officer. This person is parked illegally, and when I tried to explain the community parking arrangements, they became belligerent. Officer Martinez looked at Linda. Ma'am, are you the store manager? Yes, I am. And I've just explained to this customer that we don't have any reserved parking spaces for specific communities. The person she's complaining about is parked legally in a regular customer space. The officer nodded and turned to me. You're the one who called? Yes, sir. My car is legally parked, but she blocked it in with her SUV because she claims I'm violating some arrangement between the store and her community association. The store manager just confirmed that no such arrangement exists. Officer Martinez looked at Karen with the expression of someone who'd just figured out the entire situation in about 30 seconds. Ma'am, did you block this person's vehicle? Karen's confidence was evaporating faster than water in the desert. I was simply parking in an available space. Show me, the officer said. We all trooped outside, where Karen's SUV was still positioned inches from my rear bumper in what was clearly the driving lane. Officer Martinez took one look at the situation and shook his head. Ma'am, your vehicle is illegally parked in a traffic lane and blocking another customer's car. This is a clear violation of municipal parking ordinances. Karen tried one last desperate gambit. But officer, I'm the president of the Willowbrook Community Association. We have an understanding with this establishment. Officer Martinez had obviously dealt with self-appointed parking vigilantes before. Ma'am, being president of a community association doesn't give you authority to enforce parking regulations at private businesses. And even if you had such authority, blocking someone's car is illegal. He pulled out his citation book. I'm going to need to see your driver's license and registration. The sight of the citation book seemed to snap Karen back to reality. A ticket? But I was just trying to maintain order. Ma'am, you've committed several violations here. Blocking a vehicle, obstructing traffic flow in a parking lot, and potentially harassment of another customer. As Officer Martinez wrote the citation, more people had gathered to watch the show. Karen was becoming increasingly aware that her public humiliation was being witnessed by a growing audience of amused shoppers. This is ridiculous, she declared, but her voice had lost all its earlier authority. I'll be speaking to your supervisor about this. You're certainly welcome to do that, ma'am. Here's your citation. You need to move your vehicle immediately, or I'll have to issue additional violations. Karen snatched the ticket and stalked back to her SUV, her face now a shade of red that probably had its own entry in the Pantone color guide. She started her engine with enough aggressive revving to wake the dead, then backed up with the kind of jerky movements that suggested she was barely in control of her emotions. As she prepared to leave, she rolled down her window one last time. This isn't over, she called out, apparently unable to resist one final dramatic gesture. Officer Martinez looked up from his notepad. Ma'am, if you continue to harass this customer or attempt to enforce non-existent parking rules, you'll be cited for harassment and potentially trespassing. I'd suggest you shop elsewhere if you can't follow basic parking lot etiquette. Karen's SUV peeled out of the parking lot with enough tires squealing to leave marks on the asphalt. Several people in the parking lot actually applauded. Officer Martinez turned to me. Sorry about that. Some people think having a title in their neighborhood gives them authority everywhere else. Your car's legally parked, and you're free to finish your shopping. I thanked the officer and Linda, who both seemed relieved to have the situation resolved. As I finally headed into the store to do my grocery shopping, you know, the original purpose of this entire adventure, I couldn't help but smile. 3 weeks later, I learned through neighborhood gossip that Karen had been voted out as president of the Willowbrook Community Association. Apparently, her unauthorized parking enforcement activities and the resulting negative publicity had embarrassed the community enough that they decided new leadership was needed. I still shop at that grocery store regularly. I've never seen Karen there again, though I sometimes wonder if she's found some other parking lot to terrorize with her clipboard of imaginary authority. The moral of the story? Sometimes the best way to deal with entitled people is to simply let them reveal their true nature to the proper authorities. Karen's downfall wasn't caused by my resistance to her demands. It was caused by her own inability to recognize when she was wrong and her refusal to back down gracefully. And yes, I still park in whatever legal space I can find. Because that's how parking lots work, regardless of what self-appointed neighborhood parking presidents might think. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.